I wouldn't have said so, no. Not really. But no, I don't get the feeling that she's wildly optimistic about life. A pragmatist, I think.
King Charles believed the private archive contained nothing capable of threatening his marriage. Then an archivist placed a sealed envelope before him, written in Prince Philip's unmistakable hand, and addressed only to Princess Anne. Minutes later, Charles emerged carrying the opened note, ordered every aide out of Camilla's sitting room, and confronted his wife with a question so direct that she could not answer without exposing a secret buried since Philip's final years. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles entered Windsor Castle expecting decisions, not betrayal. During a review of restricted papers, documents kept from palace access because they contained family instructions, an archivist presented the monarch with an envelope marked for Anne alone. A condition stated that it could be opened only if a dispute over her royal duties reached the sovereign. That warning mattered because those duties represented more than ceremony. They defined the princess's place in public service and protected her influence where rank could be reshaped behind closed doors. The king broke the seal and felt his certainty collapse. Philip's documented account stated that Camilla had privately tried to influence Anne's future position, responsibilities, and ceremonial authority. Ceremonial authority meant the right to perform symbolic duties for the crown, a privilege carrying respect and power. Charles read the final paragraph twice. He gripped the desk, wounded by the realization that his father had expected this reckoning while his son had refused to see it coming. Camilla arrived without explanation and entered visibly impatient. Then she saw Philip's handwriting. Fear replaced irritation so quickly that Charles understood the letter was not a mystery to her. She asked where he had found it, but he did not answer. Instead, he revealed that the note recorded a promise she had made to the late Duke and later broken. He withheld the promise, watching her search his face for how much he knew. The silence became unbearable. Charles dismissed every aide, closed the sitting room door, and placed the letter between them. Camilla stared at the envelope but would not touch it. The king leaned forward, grief and fury fighting beneath his controlled voice, and asked, "Why did my father believe Anne needed protection from you?" She offered no denial. Her hands remained still, and that refusal told him more than any confession could. She knew what Philip had recorded, and Anne may have carried the truth alone for years. But before Charles could judge Camilla's silence, he had to understand why Philip had chosen Anne as the one person worthy of receiving his final warning. This was not simply a dispute between two royal women. Princess Anne represented the discipline Charles had inherited, but often struggled to embody, while Camilla represented the companionship he had defended against decades of opposition. Philip's note forced those two worlds into direct collision. For the first time, Charles could no longer protect his father's legacy, his sister's dignity, and his wife's position without choosing which relationship would bear the wound. Anne had never built her standing through applause. She accepted assignments because royal service, the public work carried out on behalf of the crown, was an obligation, not a stage. Camilla had fought for a different survival. Years beside the king had given her legitimacy. Yet it still felt fragile whenever his sister entered with the confidence of someone who had never needed permission to belong. Charles felt a wound reopen. He remembered a family dinner when Philip praised Anne's endurance after an overseas tour, calling her the one person who never confused duty with attention. The Duke barely looked toward his son. Charles had smiled then, but the memory left a bruise. Perhaps his father trusted her judgment more than his own. Now the sealed note made that fear impossible to dismiss. Camilla watched him revisit the past and tried to steady the conversation. She said Philip had misunderstood an exchange about future responsibilities, but she would not explain why he recorded his warning instead of challenging her openly. Her restraint sounded careful rather than innocent. When Charles asked what promise had been broken, she lowered her eyes and repeated that the Duke had always doubted her intentions. Anne received the summons beside an unfinished cup of tea. She read Charles's message twice and understood that the envelope had surfaced. The wording mattered. He used language reserved for family meetings with constitutional weight, meaning discussions that could affect how senior royals served the monarchy. She stood, left the tea untouched, and departed without asking what evidence had been found. Charles returned to the letter and noticed a reference near the final lines. A second copy of a memorandum. A memorandum was a written record of decisions and promises, and this one could prove whether Philip had acted from suspicion or direct knowledge. The king searched the envelope again. Nothing. Anne arrived carrying no papers and offering no defense. She faced her brother, glanced at Camilla, and spoke with certainty. He told me, you would find it only when you were ready to believe it. Anne's words did not begin the story. They pulled Charles back to the precise royal ceremony, where Philip first realized that Camilla's private ambitions had crossed a dangerous line. The conflict had not begun with the envelope. It began during a closed rehearsal for a major royal ceremony, when a simple change to the procession order placed Camilla ahead of Anne in a role traditionally reserved for senior blood members of the family. Most dismissed the alteration as protocol. Philip did not. He watched Anne step aside without protest, saw Camilla accept the advantage without hesitation, and understood that the change was neither accidental nor temporary. Windsor felt unusually tense that morning. Courtiers moved through final arrangements for precedence, the formal order deciding who stands, enters, and sits before whom during royal events. Anne expected to perform the role Philip had discussed with her weeks earlier, one linking the late Queen's generation to the future reign of Charles. For her, it was not about attention. It confirmed that years of service still carried meaning inside a family increasingly shaped by private loyalties. Anne received the change minutes before the rehearsal began. A senior aide told her that Camilla would take the position instead. She removed her gloves, placed them on a chair, and answered that she would stand wherever the crown required. Her calm spared everyone embarrassment, but Philip saw what others ignored. His daughter had been pushed aside, and she had protected the institution from the humiliation done to her. Philip confronted Camilla after the rehearsal. He asked whether she had requested the alteration, expecting caution or denial. She gave neither. The Queen Consort replied that the monarchy must reflect the king's household, not the duke's memories. Her words struck him because Charles had not yet inherited the throne, yet she was already speaking as though his future reign belonged to her influence. The warning became urgent moments later. Philip overheard Camilla instructing the same aide to remove Anne gradually from selected ceremonial duties, so no single decision would provoke resistance. That conversation became the point of no return. He followed her into the castle library and demanded a promise that his daughter's constitutional and ceremonial position would remain untouched. Constitutional position meant her recognized place within the working structure of the monarchy. She agreed, but he no longer trusted words alone. Philip commissioned a confidential memorandum recording the attempted changes and Camilla's promise. Months later, another duty quietly disappeared from Anne's schedule. He sealed his warning, placed the evidence beyond ordinary palace access, and told his daughter that Charles might one day need proof stronger than family loyalty, and that day was now here. Now, with that broken promise laid bare, Charles returned to Camilla, not as the husband who had defended her for years, but as the sovereign demanding the truth face to face. Charles did not raise his voice when he confronted Camilla. That made the moment more frightening. He stood across from her in the private sitting room, Philip's letter resting between them, and asked whether she had deliberately worked to diminish Anne's role. Camilla tried to redirect the conversation toward protocol, loyalty, and the pressures of becoming queen. Charles pushed the document forward and demanded a simpler answer, yes or no. Charles entered carrying more than his father's warning. Beneath the opened envelope sat records of ceremonial changes approved before his accession, the moment when a successor formally becomes sovereign. Those files mattered because they showed a pattern, not one misunderstanding. Camilla understood the danger immediately. This was no ordinary argument between husband and wife. The king was questioning her as head of the royal household, and every answer could decide how much authority she retained. Charles asked why Philip believed Anne needed protection. Camilla rose, but he told her to sit. The command ended her attempt to escape the pressure by changing the rhythm of the room. She obeyed, then admitted that she had considered the princess resistant to change. Anne's confidence, she said, made her feel permanently judged and pushed outside the range she had helped her husband reach. Camilla denied ordering anyone to remove Anne outright, yet she acknowledged discussing a gradual rebalancing of duties with a palace official. The phrase struck Charles like a confession because Philip had written those exact words in his documented account. A gradual rebalancing meant shifting responsibilities little by little, carefully enough that no single decision appeared hostile. The king asked who had approved the first change. She answered that she could not remember. Charles opened the ceremonial file. He removed one page and placed it beside the letter. A handwritten annotation authorized the disputed alteration, and Camilla's initials stood beneath it. She stared at the mark, then said it had been advice, not an order. He replied that advice becomes power when staff are afraid to refuse it. Her defense collapsed because the record connected her private fear directly to Anne's public humiliation. Silence delivered the verdict. Charles removed his wedding ring and set it beside Philip's note. Camilla looked at his hand, finally understanding the warning. He was not ending their marriage, but he was ending the protection that marriage had given her. Personal loyalty would no longer shield royal misconduct, and affection would no longer erase evidence. The evidence had transformed his private suspicion into a crisis demanding immediate action. Yet Charles's anger alone could not decide Camilla's fate, because the real struggle now moved beyond their marriage and into the machinery controlling royal power. Camilla possessed a title, public visibility, and the confidence of a woman who had survived decades of hostility. But Philip's note revealed the boundary she had misjudged. Access to the king was not the same as authority over the crown. Inside a small Windsor office, Charles gathered Anne, Prince William, and the senior private secretary. No accusations were announced. No public statement was prepared. Instead, they examined who controlled the assignments Camilla had tried to reshape. Charles understood that the distinction could no longer remain blurred. Camilla could advise him as his wife, but ceremonial duties and household responsibilities required the sovereign's approval, meaning the monarch held the final power over official royal work. Her title gave her standing. It did not give her the right to redirect another senior royal's service privately. William studied the disputed files because the damage reached beyond one family argument. The future king would inherit those relationships, and any unresolved struggle could poison the structure waiting for him. Anne sat opposite her brother and refused to demand punishment. She said restoring her pride mattered less than preventing any relative from rewriting royal service around personal resentment. Charles felt the shame before she finished. Anne revealed in that closed meeting that she had remained silent to protect his happiness. Even after realizing Camilla had broken her promise to Philip, she had accepted humiliation because she feared forcing her brother to choose. The king looked down, understanding that her loyalty had become the shield behind which his denial survived. The senior private secretary entered carrying an archived household box. A private secretary is the senior aide who manages royal decisions, correspondence, and official access. He placed the missing memorandum on the table, cut its seal, and unfolded the pages while Charles watched without speaking. Every movement tightened the pressure. The record would either weaken Philip's warning or destroy Camilla's defense. William read the key passage aloud. Philip had documented Camilla's assurance and listed the exact duties she promised never to obstruct. The prince repeated the wording slowly, leaving no space for doubt. Charles lowered his head. His wife's denial could not survive a record precise, and Anne no longer needed to defend herself against silence. Charles took up his pen and signed an immediate directive, removing Camilla from all internal discussions concerning Anne's duties, patronages, precedents, and ceremonial assignments. Patronages are public causes supported by royals, while precedence determines their formal order at official events. The decision was narrow, but its meaning was brutal. Trust had been withdrawn. The signature took only seconds, but when the directive reached Camilla's household, the first consequences struck with a force no title could soften. Camilla discovered the decision not through Charles, but through an empty place at a meeting table. Her briefing folder was removed, her private secretary was told that attendance had been revised, and a scheduled discussion concerning Anne's engagements disappeared from her diary. Nothing public had changed. She still held her title. Yet within the palace, the network of influence she had carefully built was being dismantled one quiet instruction at a time. Camilla entered the room expecting tension, but not erasure. Her chair was gone, and the folders contained no reference to her office. Charles's directive had reached only a narrow circle, limiting her involvement in matters affecting Anne and requiring written approval for any future ceremonial recommendation. That restriction mattered because informal suggestions had once carried the weight of commands, allowing personal preference to shape official royal work without leaving a clear trail. Camilla stood motionless before asking an aide who had authorized the change. He answered that the king had approved it. The words landed harder than any public rebuke. Staff members who once acted on her wishes now sought confirmation directly from Charles's office, transforming the balance of the household. Her title remained untouched, but the trust that gave it private force had vanished. Questions were redirected away from her, making the punishment impossible to ignore. Camilla returned to her rooms and dismissed everyone. She sat alone, knowing her husband no longer trusted her judgment. A close advisor later entered with a warning drawn from the recovered memorandum, the written record documenting Philip's concerns. It referred to another attempt to restrict Anne's access to Charles during a period of family tension. The threat was no longer limited to ceremony. It suggested that influence had reached into the relationship between brother and sister, where loyalty had once seemed untouchable. Charles canceled dinner with Camilla that evening. He met Anne instead, without aides, secretaries, or prepared notes between them. The siblings spoke plainly. He restored every responsibility altered after Philip's warning, and admitted that his silence had allowed private resentment to become institutional damage. Anne accepted the decision without triumph, because restoration could return duties, but it could not return the years in which her loyalty had been doubted. Her restraint made his guilt sharper. Camilla made one final choice. She wrote Anne a request by hand, offered no defense, and asked for 20 minutes without Charles, courtiers, or titles between them. Then she sealed the note herself, aware that this meeting could begin accountability or expose a wound. For the first time, the conflict would no longer be filtered through Philip's words or Charles's authority. Camilla and Anne would face each other alone. Anne arrived precisely on time and entered without an aide. Camilla was already waiting, with Philip's copied memorandum placed unopened on the table. There were no private secretaries, no carefully drafted talking points, and no king positioned between them. For years, each woman had treated the other as a symbol. Anne, as the guardian of duty, Camilla, as the survivor demanding acceptance. Alone together, they were forced to speak as two people who had wounded one another. Camilla spoke first, and her voice carried none of its usual certainty. She explained that her earliest years inside the royal family had taught her to treat acceptance as something that could vanish without warning. Visible position and unquestioned access to Charles became proof that she belonged. The copied memorandum, a written record preserving promises and decisions, now exposed how far that fear had pushed her. Anne listened without interruption, then answered with quiet force. Royal service, she said, was never measured by closeness to the sovereign. It was measured by accepting difficult obligations when applause never came. That distinction mattered because the crown depended on duty appearing larger than personal preference. If family insecurity could rewrite official roles, then service itself became vulnerable to whoever stood nearest the king. Camilla admitted that Anne's confidence with Philip and Charles had felt threatening. She had mistaken an old family bond for a deliberate wall built against her. The queen consort confessed this directly in their private conversation, without an advisor shaping the words. Yet the princess refused to let honesty soften consequence. She revealed that losing ceremonial duties had hurt less than watching her brother dismiss repeated concerns, because acknowledging them might disturb his marriage. Camilla finally asked whether Philip had hated her. Anne paused and folded her hands before answering. He had feared what insecurity might persuade her to do, but he still believed she could choose differently. The reply offered no comfort, only responsibility. Philip's warning had not condemned her forever. It had preserved one final chance to stop. Camilla took up a pen and signed a written renunciation of any future involvement in Anne's appointments or precedents, the formal order deciding a royal's place at official events. She also agreed to acknowledge the broken promise directly to Charles. Anne collected the document, but offered no forgiveness. At the door, she turned and said, "Now tell him the truth, without asking him to protect you from it." Camilla remained seated after she left, knowing confession would cost the protection she trusted most. By the following morning, the private reckoning could no longer remain entirely private, because the palace's sudden changes had already drawn the attention of the nation. The first public sign was not an announcement. It was Camilla's unexplained absence from a scheduled planning meeting connected to Princess Anne's ceremonial program. Within hours, royal correspondents noticed that Anne's responsibilities had expanded while Camilla's advisory role had narrowed. Then a newspaper appeared, with Philip's sealed envelope dominating its front page. The private family confrontation became a national argument about loyalty, ambition, and the true meaning of service. Charles watched the morning coverage alone. The palace had confirmed that ceremonial responsibilities were under review, but it refused to disclose the contents of Philip's note. That silence mattered because secrecy no longer protected the family. It allowed every missing detail to become a fresh accusation. A ceremonial program, the official plan assigning duties and positions at royal events, had suddenly become evidence of a deeper struggle over influence. Broadcasters framed the crisis as inherited duty against personal power. Constitutional commentators reminded viewers that Charles retained complete control over internal assignments, meaning the sovereign alone could approve changes affecting senior working royals. The king understood the danger. If he protected Camilla through silence, the public might see his restraint as another rejection of Anne, the sister who had already sacrificed her pride to preserve his marriage. Camilla opened the newspaper before her staff arrived. Her name stood beside the words, "Philip's final warning." She folded the paper quietly, hiding it before anyone could witness her humiliation. The queen consort had survived public anger before, but this judgment felt different. It was not about her past. It was about a promise she had broken after finally gaining the acceptance she had spent years demanding. Outside Buckingham Palace, the pressure became impossible to contain. A newspaper vendor raised a front page showing a sealed cream envelope beneath the headline, "The Promise She Broke." A crowd gathered near the gates, and several people applauded when Anne's car passed through. The princess did not respond, yet the sound carried a clear verdict. Duty had been recognized, and silence had failed. Charles authorized a concise palace statement confirming that Anne's role was fully protected and that internal procedures had changed to prevent personal interference. Camilla issued no denial. Instead, she asked him for permission to attend the next family gathering without ceremonial prominence, prepared to accept consequences through conduct rather than words. The request surprised him, but it did not erase what remained unfinished. For once, she would enter without royal protection, as a woman facing the cost of her ambition. The nation had delivered its judgment loudly, but the final verdict belonged to the family, and to the king who had delayed choosing between comfort and truth for far too long. The final decision was made in the same room where Charles had first confronted Camilla. Philip's letter remained on the table, but its purpose had changed. It was no longer evidence waiting to be believed. It had become a test the king had finally answered. Charles summoned Anne and Camilla together, not to reopen the accusation, but to declare what would be restored, what would be restricted, and what their family would carry forward. Charles spoke without anger. Anne's ceremonial authority, patronage responsibilities, and direct access to the sovereign would be protected through written procedures. Patronage responsibilities meant the charities represented by a royal, while direct access ensured no gatekeeper could block her voice. These protections mattered because duty could not depend on family pressure or promises made behind closed doors. Camilla listened as the limits were read aloud. She would retain her title and public duties, but permanently surrender all influence over Anne's role, precedence, staffing, and assignments. Precedence meant the formal order deciding where senior royals stand during events. The Queen Consort signed, accepting that her place would be measured by conduct rather than closeness to her husband. Charles faced Anne and apologized. He admitted in that family meeting that he had ignored warning signs because confronting his wife threatened the happiness he had fought to secure. His sister did not rescue him. She said love became dangerous when it demanded silence from everyone around it. Camilla acknowledged that insecurity had become an attempt to control another woman's place. She asked for no excuse and promised that trust would be rebuilt through action. Anne placed Philip's note inside its envelope and handed it to Charles. He sealed it in a new archive folder marked Resolved, then returned his wedding ring to his hand. Anne offered no sentimental reconciliation, but she accepted Camilla's accountability with a quiet nod. Charles understood that forgiveness would not arrive through speeches. It would exist only if the broken promise was never repeated. The verdict was final, but its lesson endured. Philip's warning had protected more than his daughter. It forced the king to prove that love could not overrule duty, marriage could not silence truth, and the crown could survive only when those nearest to it faced the same standard as everyone else. And when Charles finally closed Philip's file, the matter was finished. Anne's dignity had been restored, Camilla's influence had been firmly limited, and the king had chosen duty over denial, preserving both his family's future and the moral authority of the crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.